1997. We bought a house in Sun Lakes. Turned out to be about 4 blocks from Bob and Bonnie. So that began our personal relationship. Bob and I knew each other professionally for almost 20 years. The wives, Bonnie and Elaine, had never met each other until we moved down here. And turned out they got along well, and it was the beginning of a 20-year, very warm personal relationship. And I would just like to fill in some of the highlights that I remember from those years. First of all was traveling to retirees conferences. Bob and I belonged to something called the Association for Former Customs Special Agents. They had, like all retirees, had an annual meeting, shifted it from coast to coast. Some of the highlights were San Diego, Hollywood, Florida, Los Angeles, St. Augustine, Tucson. One of my better moments was one of our first meetings in Las Vegas. The Sanfords and Elaine and I drove separate cars, caught up with them out here at 303 and 60, and we were scheduled for breakfast in Wickiup. So we stopped for breakfast in Wickiup, nice restaurant. Afterwards, it's got a trinket and bauble shop, rather a nice one. And Bob stops in there and buys himself a yard statue about the size. And it's Mommy Coyote, 2 or 3 coyotes howling. And the lady packed it up so it wouldn't break, got in the car, proceeded on up to Kingman where we stopped to gas up so we didn't have to pay the high Las Vegas prices. Bob came over to my car and he's standing there with his leg behind him, leaning on the fender. I'm standing there holding the gas pump, wide open. And the ladies went into the service station, and I look up to see them coming out, and they're laughing and giggling and carrying on. And about that time, Bob got a strange look on his face, and I realized the gas pump hadn't shut off. It ran down the fender into his new boat dock shoes he had, and he got quite a shoe full. I got it shut off. Bob's standing there emptying his shoe out when the ladies show up to inform him that the same statue was in this service station like $15 cheaper. And that was one of our first experiences with Bob and Bonnie. I never will forget that one. We had many others after that. We did quite a few local trips. We went up to Prescott. This time Bob was driving. We were going to pull in and check out a gun store. About that time, a big hailstorm came up. We decided to sit in the car, and it was just thump, 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 thump. I turned to Bob and I said, "I'm sure glad you drove on this trip." I remember taking in the old movie set out here at Gold Canyon where they filmed quite a few Western movies. We went down to Coolidge to the National Monument down there to pick up our golden passports for the national parks. We did an overnight trip to Sholo, and I remember we're driving through Heber, and Bob says, "How much further is this?" I said, "Well, we're about halfway there." And he says, "Let's turn around and go back." But these are just some of the highlights of our travels. Bob was active in a couple civic organizations down here. The first one was the Fraternal Order of Police. He belonged to the Mesa chapter. He was there about 5 years. Bob was also active in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's programs for about 3 years. This is when they were setting it up originally. He and his partner hit all the sheriff's offices, most of the police departments, and quite a few of the Indian nations in the state of Arizona to introduce this program. And this took them several years. As Mike mentioned, and we all know, Bob was a big gym buff. And as long as I knew him, he was a workout type guy and prided himself in going to the gym. Some of the social activities we had down here were Wednesday night hand and foot card groups. That was one night a week. He played with Mike and Patty one or two nights a week, and they played with Elaine and I one or two nights a week. And with Elaine and I, that was 12 or 15 years, so we played together. You would have thought he had figured out the red threes by then. Tuesday was our shooting group with breakfast afterwards. For any of those involved in shooting, you know, a few years back, like 5, 7 years ago, ammo got very scarce and it got very expensive, which curtailed our shooting. But it did not curtail our breakfast meetings, which go on today. So these are some of the highlights. I know Bob and Bonnie kept contact with their Palo Verde neighbors. That was their first house in Sun Lakes. And I know they kept contact over the years with them. As long as I knew Bob, I knew him as a Christian. He was regularly involved in a church in his area. And Bob was a God-fearing man that believed in Jesus Christ. And I always respected him for that. And in closing, I'd just like to say he will be sorely missed as a friend and a neighbor. Thank you.